I'm a 34-year-old man, and I've always prided myself on being a planner. I worked hard through college, got a decent job in tech, and started investing early. By the time I was 30, I had a respectable portfolio that I'd built up steadily. Nothing flashy, but enough to feel secure about my future. My parents always said they were proud of how responsible I was compared to my younger sister, but I should have known that responsible really meant the backup plan. The storm started brewing 6 months ago when my sister announced she was getting married. Again, her third wedding by the age of 28, each one more extravagant than the last. The first was a whirlwind romance with a guy she met in college, divorced after a year. The second was to a co-worker, lasting about 2 years before she walked out because, as she put it, he didn't excite me anymore. Now, she'd found someone new, and my parents were practically singing hosannas about it being true love. At first, I was happy for her. Despite her impulsiveness, she's my sister, and I wanted to believe she'd finally found stability. But then came the ask, or rather the demand. It was a Sunday dinner in my parents' house. Mom had made her famous roast chicken, and everyone was in high spirits. Halfway through the meal, Dad cleared his throat and said, "We've been talking, and we need your help, son." I put my fork down. "Sure, what's up?" "Well," he started, glancing at my mom, who nodded like a co-conspirator. "Your sister's wedding is going to be a bit more expensive than we thought. She deserves something special, after all she's been through. And we're not as young as we used to be." And I asked, already sensing where this was going. "And we were hoping you could pitch in," Mom finished for him, her tone far too casual for what she was really asking. "How much are we talking about?" My sister, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly perked up. "Oh, not much. Just $50,000. That's not a big deal for you, right? You got all those stocks and stuff?" I stared at her, dumbfounded. $50,000? Are you serious? "You've got way more than that," she said, as if that justified the audacity of her request. "And it's not like you're using it right now. Come on, it's for my wedding." I won't bore you with the full back and forth, but suffice it to say, the conversation spiraled. My parents backed her up, saying it was my duty as family to support her and that they'd always raised me to share what I had. When I pointed out that my investments were meant for my future, maybe buying a house or starting my own family someday, my mom actually rolled her eyes and said, "You're single. It's not like you're in a rush for any of that." My sister, meanwhile, played every manipulative card in the book. She cried about how much pressure she was under, how her fiancé's family was expecting a lavish ceremony, and how this wedding was her chance to prove she wasn't a failure at relationships. She even tried guilt-tripping me by saying, "You don't want me to feel like I'm not worth it, do you?" By the end of the night, I was furious. I told them there was no way I was selling my stocks to fund a wedding, especially a third wedding. My dad looked disappointed but didn't push further, at least not then. My mom, however, muttered something about how money changes people, and my sister stormed out in tears. The fallout was worse than I expected. Over the next few weeks, my parents bombarded me with calls and texts, alternating between guilt-tripping and outright demanding I reconsider. They even tried to set up family meetings to pressure me further. My sister, of course, leaned into her role as the victim, telling anyone who'd listened that I was selfish and didn't care about family. Then came the dirty tricks. One day, I got a call from my brokerage alerting me to a request to liquidate a significant portion of my portfolio. Turns out my parents had somehow gotten hold of my account information. Thankfully, I'd set up two-factor authentication, so the request didn't go through, but the sheer audacity of it left me shaken. When I confronted them, my mom brushed it off like it was no big deal, saying, "We were just trying to help you make the right decision." I cut off contact after that, blocked their numbers, stopped visiting, the whole 9 yards. It wasn't an easy decision, but I couldn't let them steamroll me anymore. Still, they didn't give up. My sister took to social media, posting vague but pointed jabs about how some people value money over family. She even tried to turn mutual friends and extended relatives against me, claiming I'd abandoned her in her time of need. That's when I decided enough was enough. If they wanted to play dirty, I could play smarter. First, I tightened the security on all my accounts. I also spoke to a lawyer, who advised me to send a formal cease and desist letter to my parents regarding any further attempts to access my finances. It was a harsh move, but necessary. Next, I started documenting everything. Every text, every voicemail, every social media post. When my sister made the mistake of publicly accusing me of stealing family money, which was laughable, considering it was all my own hard-earned cash, I had my lawyer send her a defamation notice. That shut her up quickly. But the real kicker came when I found out they'd been lying to me about their financial situation. My parents weren't broke. They'd recently taken out a second mortgage on their house to fund my sister's previous wedding, and they were still paying it off. Meanwhile, they'd been funneling money to my sister for years, covering everything from her rent to her credit card bills. They weren't asking me to help because they couldn't afford it. They were asking because they didn't want to say no to her. I decided to expose the truth. I compiled all the evidence, bank statements, text messages, everything, and sent it to a few key family members who'd been giving me grief about abandoning my sister. I didn't embellish or add commentary. I just let the facts speak for themselves. The fallout was glorious. Relatives who'd been on my parents' side quickly turned on them, furious that they'd been lied to and manipulated. My sister's fiancé's family, who'd apparently been under the impression that my parents were wealthy, started questioning whether the wedding was even a good idea. Rumor has it, the engagement fell apart shortly after. As for my parents, they've been radio silent ever since. I heard through the grapevine that they're struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments and are considering downsizing. Do I feel bad? Honestly, not really. They made their bed, and now they have to lie in it. Cutting ties with my family wasn't easy, and there are days when I miss the way things used to be. But I've come to realize that being family doesn't give anyone the right to take advantage of you. If anything, it makes their betrayal worse. So, yeah, I'm done playing the role of the responsible son. I've got my own future to think about, and I'm not letting anyone guilt me into giving that up. After the dust settled, I felt an odd sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under the crushing weight of familial obligations. I didn't have to walk on eggshells around my parents or sacrifice my happiness to fix my sister's mistakes. But that's not to say everything was smooth sailing. Cutting ties with your family comes with its own unique challenges. The holidays were particularly tough. While everyone else was sharing pictures of their big family dinners, I spent Thanksgiving alone with a frozen pizza and a movie. Christmas wasn't much better. The silence from my parents was deafening, but it was also a reminder of the price I paid for standing up for myself. Still, I wasn't about to let loneliness make me second-guess my decision. Instead, I threw myself into building a life I could be proud of. I started a side hustle, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time for while juggling family drama. Slowly but surely, it took off. With the money I saved from not bailing out my sister, I was able to put a down payment on a condo. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. The irony of the situation hit me a few months later when I ran into an old family friend at a coffee shop. She hadn't heard about the falling out and casually asked how my parents and sister were doing. "Oh, I said, forcing a smile. "Everyone's doing their own thing these days." She nodded, sipping her latte. "I heard about the wedding falling through. Such a shame. Your parents must be devastated after everything they did for her." I blinked. "Wait, what do you mean?" She gave me a curious look. "Didn't they tell you? They sold off some of your dad's retirement funds to help pay for it. And now that it's not happening, they're struggling to get by." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Part of me wanted to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it. They'd put themselves in financial ruin for my sister, a grown woman who couldn't keep a marriage together for more than a couple of years, and now they were reaping the consequences. At first, I felt a pang of guilt. No matter how justified I was in cutting them off, they were still my parents. But then I reminded myself of all the times they'd tried to undermine me, manipulate me, and guilt me into sacrificing my future. They'd made their choices, and those choices had consequences. But just because I wasn't going to bail them out didn't mean I was done protecting myself. I contacted my lawyer again to make sure my name wasn't tied to any of their debts. Sure enough, they'd listed me as a co-signer on a personal loan they'd taken out for one of my sister's earlier weddings. The audacity was staggering. Luckily, My lawyer helped me dispute it, and I was officially removed as a co-signer. It was a wake-up call, though. These people, my own flesh and blood, would have dragged me down with them if I hadn't been careful. Months turned into a year, and life moved on. I focused on my career, my friendships, and even started dating someone who understood the complexities of my family situation. She was a breath of fresh air, a reminder that not all relationships have to be toxic or transactional. One day, out of the blue, I got an email from my mom. It was short and to the point. "We miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time, torn between curiosity and anger. Part of me wanted to reply, but another part of me knew better. If they truly wanted to reconcile, they'd have to do a lot more than send a vague email. So I deleted it. The thing about toxic people is that they don't change unless they're forced to confront their behavior. My parents and sister had spent years enabling each other, creating a dynamic where entitlement and manipulation were the norm. By walking away, I disrupted that cycle. Do I think they've learned their lesson? Honestly, I doubt it. But that's not my problem anymore. What I've learned is that boundaries are essential, even when it comes to family. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who hurt you the most. And it's okay to walk away from that, to choose yourself, your sanity, and your future over their dysfunction. If you've ever dealt with entitled family members, I feel for you. And if you haven't yet stood up to them, trust me, it's worth it. And hey, if my sister ever manages to get married again, maybe I'll send her a card. A cheap one. If you like this story, hit subscribe. Who knows? Maybe my next post will be about the time my sister tried to borrow my condo for her honeymoon. Spoiler alert, not happening.